Hey everybody, it's Andy with Lucky Paper, here with a different kind of video for you. I hired Brian Coval of the BoshNRoll YouTube channel to give me some coaching on a match I played with a deck drafted from my Bun Magic Cube. So this video is going to be Brian and I reviewing the footage from that match and talking about all the decisions that I made or didn't make and all of the many numerous mistakes that I made and ways I could have played better. So I'm feeling a little vulnerable posting this video, full transparency. Be nice in the comments section. Magic's a difficult game. I just wanted to share it because I think Cube is a really cool context in which to learn about Magic strategy a little more abstractly, because unlike Constructed or Retail Limited, there's not a sea of pros and content creators out there telling you how to get better at this format, because every cube is unique. So it was really cool to get Brian's perspective on my format and my strengths and weaknesses as a player, and I hope you get something out of it too. We make a bunch of paper cube content on this channel, so if you're into that, make sure you like and subscribe. And if you want to get coached as well, which I highly recommend, this is my first coaching experience, and I feel like I got a lot out of it. I'm going to post Brian's YouTube channel and Patreon in the show notes, so you too can also get told all the mistakes you made in your match of Magic that you played. If you think you're so smart, get coached yourself and find out. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the video, and yeah, let's get into it. Wait, one last thing. I forgot to thank Anthony, my partner in crime and podcast co-host, who very graciously recorded all of the cards I drew over the course of this game so I could have some notes to refer back to in my session with Brian. So, thank you, Anthony. Let's get to the video.
Normally, what I would do here is take a look at the list, take a look at the format, because normally I'm coaching Constructed.
Right.
And so this is going to be a little different for that. Anyone who watches my stuff knows how hilariously not good at cube drafting I am.
So you say, but I'm not convinced.
I mean, due to lack of doing it, because I'm just playing Constructed all the time.
Yeah.
And famously, I recently started off a vintage cube draft by saying, oh, show and tell is the most powerful card in this pack, and slamming it. And there was a mana drain in the pack. And got dragged for that for weeks. It still comes up.
People love to have opinions on the internet.
Sure. But yeah, I do tend to look at cube cards in the frame of legacy or vintage power level, which is where I see them. And that doesn't always go 1-for-1 into the cube environment, but it frequently does.
Right.
So a powerful card is a powerful card. Luckily, you've already done the draft here.
I have already done the draft. So I can tell you a little bit about my cube format. I am maybe biased because I am the designer of it, so I'm not sure how accurate my impressions of it are, but the goals of this cube is definitely to... I consider it to be inspired by like the play patterns of Eternal formats like Legacy, and that doesn't mean that like the cards are 1-for-1, obviously. But if you basically take Legacy and like take out combo, there is no combo present in this environment. But aside from that, the decks are very efficient, very low curving. The threats are very efficient and scary. A lot of Legacy staples will be present, and there's also a lot of cards that aren't Legacy staples because they're just not good enough. But I'm playing Singleton here, so I gotta stretch a little bit. So compared to what you might be used to in like the Magic Online Vintage Cube or something, the decks in this format can be very focused. So I mentioned this deck is a bit of a pile, and it is a bit of a pile, I think, for my format, because it is definitely possible to draft like a very focused, like near constructed deck in this cube if you're trying to. The one thing I do break Singleton for is fixing, which I don't happen to have any duplicates here, but there's a ton of fixing in the environment too. So it's only a 360 card cube. We're always drafting the whole thing, but there are 2 copies of every fetch land and 3 copies of every shock land, which I do to make the mana good and also to help encourage games to just not drag on super long. I'm not a huge fan of like big grindy games, partially because I'm not great at them, and maybe we'll see an example of that here. But yeah, so the games are trying to be like efficient and quick and hinge on really important decisions, hopefully earlier in the game than later in the game.
Okay. And you said you do draft the whole cube every time?
Yes. Yeah. So draft the whole cube every time. And the match I have for us today is me playing against an opponent that is a black-white Lurrus deck. So we will see a Companion Lurrus, which obviously has a lot of power level to it. So
yeah, that's pretty cool that you can support a Lurrus Companion in draft. Love it.
Yeah, it is not trivial at all. My cube is there's almost nothing in my cube over, like, it's probably a dozen cards that are 4 mana or more, and the rest is, 1s and 2s and a couple 3s here and there. So for my cube, this is a really high curving deck that we're looking at here, and To talk about the deck specifically, I said it's a bit of a pile. I think it is. I don't think it's terrible, but I think the weakness of this deck is that I'm not optimizing for the best cards, right? Like the best cards in this pool are like Mother of Runes, Skull Clamp, Murktide Regent, Ledger Shredder, and it's not a great version of any of those cards' deck, right? Like, it's not really abusing Mother of Runes by playing a bunch of cheap threats. It's actually kind of creature light. Same goes for Skull Clamp. I'm not making any tokens I can Skull Clamp away and, like, combo off, so it's a very fair Skull Clamp I'm playing. And then cards like Ledger Shredder and Murktide Regent, and also Fairy Vandal to a lesser degree, just really want you to be playing like a ton of cantrips. And I just happen to not get that many cantrips in this draft, even though I play a ton of them in my cube. So it's kind of like two halves of like different decks, I think, that are kind of mushed together here. And I do think a blue-white, tempo deck can work, but instead of having some of these like higher end cards that I have here, I'd rather have like a Clarion Spirit, a Monastery Mentor, and 5 more cantrips, right? And then I think this deck would be maybe a little more focused. But as is, it's kind of a little bit of a mess, at least for my cube.
Yeah, having the context of what the cube is about, because when you sent me the list, I was like, this doesn't look that bad. We got blue spells, white spells. There's a plan here. But you listed your best cards as like Mother of Runes and Skull Clamp. And Mother of Runes is one of 3 targets for Skull Clamp that immediately dies to draw 2 cards,
right,
which kills one of your best cards with the other best card.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see Monastery Mentor just setting this deck off into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And yeah, we got some work to do given that description. But
yes.
I am really glad that the cube gets fully drafted every time. So you'll have at least some information about who you were feeding and what they might be into. And you'll know what cards are in the cube and that they definitely ended up in someone's pile. Because coming from primarily constructed play and constructed coaching, I spend a lot of time like, okay, what do you think this land drop means? What archetype are they? What can they have on this spot on the mana curve?
Right.
They fetched on turn 2. What does that mean? What's coming? Just predict it now. Like, is this prismatic ending or is it Wrenn and 6? Like, what do you think this deck is doing? And the fact that all cards are in play and you know what they are, I'm going to be posing those questions to you.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know the answer, but you probably will.
Or at least have some inkling. Yeah. Yeah, right. Every card is drafted every time. And also, there's a lot of redundancy, right? Like, there are just, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 2-mana counter spells in the cube. And there's a ton of 1-mana removal and 2-mana removal. So, even if I don't know the exact card they might have, right, because no one's playing 4 of Prismatic Ending or whatever, there's definitely a range of things they could have, or like a category of things they could potentially have.
Right.
And I should say, in this context, too, I mean, we played these games in paper, obviously, which is, I think, going to be interesting to review a paper match. So I did, like, build my opponent's deck in paper. I, like, went through my cube and pulled all the cards for it. I tried not to, like, pay super close attention to exactly... I didn't try to memorize the list, right? Because I was trying to approach the match as it would be in a real, draft where I didn't know what my opponent was on. I mean, they reveal Aluris as a companion before the games, so that already says a lot. But I did have a sense of the list, somewhat abstractly because I put the cards together, so...
Yep, makes sense.
Should we dive into the games?
Yeah, let's go do this.
Do you want to know the outcome of this match before we get into it, or...
I don't.
Okay, cool.
Let me figure this out as we go, and we'll see if the things that I ask you and answers you give, and you're from the future here. I'm living in the present. So you know the answers, but we'll see if the questions I ask you get you to answers that may have been helpful at the time.
Yeah, and I'm also curious myself. I mean, I recorded these, I guess, like 4 days ago at this point. I'm wondering how much I'm going to remember about specific turns and what line I chose and whatnot. One thing I do really like about my cube, and it was true in this match for sure, is that I feel like there are tons of decisions to be made, and that is something I try and optimize for, is like even from turn 1 or turn 2, you're making important decisions that will affect the outcome of the game. And so there's definitely a lot of points where I'm going to be like, here, I didn't really know what to do, and I did this for X reason, but that's kind of what I'm interested in getting feedback on too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can start right here with this opening hand.
Yeah.
Like, tell me about this opening hand.
Just because I don't know how much is before we actually start playing, and I'll stop and scrub through as we go. But yeah, here's the opening hand. And I think mulligan decisions are one place where I definitely think I struggle. I feel like it's one of the harder things in Magic because you'd never so often I feel like you make the right decision and end up not working out, or vice versa, that like I never really know if I made the right decision or not. And this opening hand, I decided to keep. I think it's a perfect example of why this deck is unfocused, because, a card like Ledger Shredder or Teferi wants a very different opening hand than Mother of Runes and Skyclave Apparition, but it's still a plan, right? It's got a curve, and theoretically, I will draw cards that will also give me other options as the game goes on. But not having an obvious way to trigger the Ledger Shredder is kind of a bummer. Starting with my only 5-drop in hand is kind of a bummer, but I felt like I couldn't throw back a 1-2-3 curve with lands and spells.
Yeah, this hand looks great to me. When it comes to keeping a hand and making mulligan decisions, I do tell people don't be afraid of 6, but I also tell people don't send a perfectly fine 7.
Yeah.
And this 7, you get to Mother of Runes, put up the shields against your Ledger Shredder. They gotta basically have 2 removal spells immediately to keep Ledger Shredder from at least being a presence on the board. And you have this big Planeswalker. So there's a long-term plan. You have protection spell into sizable blocker into removal spell, and someday this big old Planeswalker will come down and do what it does. So This hand is a keep all day, every day.
Yeah, I thought it was a keep too. It definitely, I think, is one of the better hands this deck will have because of its maybe lack of focus. So
right.
So yeah, I did keep, and then my opponent. So obviously they revealed Lurrus as a companion, and then they opened on a Giver of Runes on their turn 1. They won the roll, so that's what we can see here. How legible are the cards in the video for you? Like, are you going to be able to tell what cards those are?
I am one of these people who can see the corner of a Magic card from across the room and be like, oh, that's Grim Monolith.
Perfect.
So this will be fine for me.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. I will try not to narrate too much what they're doing, but that was their turn 1. So I'm on the draw here, and what I'm going to be trying juggling here what's in my hand as we go to. So what I draw for turn is Polluted Delta, which we'll see in a second here, which already opens up the first decision, right? Of like, do I lead on Polluted Delta and fetch up a land and take some damage, or do I lead on my planes and just play Mother of Runes? And what I decided to do was do planes, but I'm not even convinced that was the right move.
So I made the error. Let me get your deck up on the screen. I forgot that it was going to leave the screen when we started, but you sent me a picture of it. I'll just pull that up.
Yeah, for fetchables, I have 1 Hallowed Fountain and I have 1 Irrigated Farmland, which is the cycling blue-white dual land. So
right.
If I'm going to play a Mother of Runes on turn 1 off the Polluted Delta, I'm going to take 3, and I'm up against a Lurrus deck that led on a white 1-drop. So it's very marginal advantage here. Like, there's no Brainstorm in my deck. There's not a ton of cards that really care about me shuffling later on in the game. So I think we're looking at like the marginal edge of thinning the deck slightly against lands versus the 3 life. And also, given my curve, I'm likely to have to pay the 3 life at some point anyway. So
right. The spot on your curve where maybe you won't have to pay 3 life is if there's nothing to Skyclave Apparition on turn 3.
Right.
Like you're very clearly going Mother Shredder here, unless I don't even know what card in your deck you could draw. Maybe Stoneforge Mystic you would play over Ledger Shredder.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you're pretty locked into your plan here. And about the fetching, we know they're a Lurrus deck, so we know they're efficient.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know the card quality. I mean, you built the cube, so you have some idea, but did they cut some banger 3-drop just to get Lurrus as the companion and have to play some otherwise cards you wouldn't necessarily main deck? Did they make concessions to get Lurrus into the command zone?
I would say generally in this cube, you basically don't have to make concessions.
Okay.
Like, even a pack 3 Lurrus, you're like, okay, fine, I'll abandon like a Liliana Planeswalker and, some random 3-drop for this incredibly powerful 8th card in my opening hand, which is always worth it. And you're very rarely like scraping for playables to get there. I find a lot of Lurrus decks too often, just in my cube specifically, play more lands. I have a lot of utility lands too, and so they'll have a couple creature lands, something like Emiria, the, dual-faced land, the mythic that can make angels or be a land on the backside. Stuff that is lands but also is action. Because if they flood out, they just put Lurrus in their hand and they have a mana sink. So,
right.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect like, oh, you're going to play some dud 2-drop that's not great for your deck next turn because you're companioning Lurrus.
Right. Yeah, so I think that playing the plains is the clean choice here. There's not a blue spell that you might draw into. Like that's why you would get Hallowed Fountain if there was something you could top deck where
Right.
you needed white this turn and blue next turn.
Yeah.
That's the reason you'd take 3 there. You're never taking a turn off Mother of Runes to fetch your tap land, and you want your
Yes.
tap land in your deck because not only is the point of a cycle land when you draw it late and you don't need it, it's a fresh card, but you have Timeless Dragon that can cycle for the Irrigated Farmland,
Yep.
which can cycle for a card, and you can get real 2 cards worth of value out of that line. I would be doing everything I can to leave Irrigated Farmland in my deck at this phase of the game.
That's good to know. That is something I do think about. I often find myself wondering, like, okay, here, let's say I don't need a untapped land on turn 1, right? I have no 1-drop, but a similar hand. In that situation, you would always fetch the Hallowed Fountain. The cost being, right, that obviously Irrigated Farmland is good if you draw it later and you just want to cycle it for a card, or you can do the Timeless Dragon thing. The cost being that if you draw it later when you need another untapped land, you'd rather it be the Hallowed Fountain in that spot. But it sounds like you think leaning towards keeping the cycling lands in your deck tends to be the better heuristic.
Generally, yes, because a lot of the time when I'm playing limited, I will draft some sort of tech land, whether it's in Cube or in a normal standard run limited set.
Mm-hmm.
If my deck ends up with something like Colony Garden in it, am I using this 0/1 plant token for anything? And how often am I going to rip this land off the top and not play a spell on curve? Like, what am I getting out of my land entering the battlefield tapped? And in the case of Irrigated Farmland specifically, it is a dual land, which is nice. But is your mana in this deck so bad that you would play Coastal Tower? Or are you there playing this to cycle this card? Because
Yeah.
I think if it was just Coastal Tower or, one of the Kaldheim snow variants, there's many ETB tap versions of this, even the ones that like the ETB tapped gain 1 life. I would probably just put an island or plains in the deck over that to make sure I'm hitting my curve.
Yeah,
But
I definitely...
a real card out of a land late is a real advantage.
Cool. That's good to know. I definitely don't like tap lands and include very few in my cube for that reason. I find that cost to be very high, especially this environment, again, is very efficient, right? Like almost every deck is doing something on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, almost every game. So tap lands got to really earn their keep, I think, here.
Right. And this is a skill that I port directly from Constructed. I play a lot of Modern where triomes are part of your mana base.
Yeah.
And I get comments on my videos all the time where it's like, why didn't you fetch your triome on turn 1? You just had Scalding Tarn go. This is a great chance to get 3 colors. It's because Scalding Tarn's going to fetch Steam Vents, and then I'm going to fetch Overgrown Tomb, and I have all my colors anyway.
Yeah.
Why would I lose the ability to draw a card later in the game when I still have perfect mana?
Cool.
So, yeah.
That's great. That's good to know. We'll see if I later on in this match do the opposite of that. Here, my Mother of Runes eats a dead weight. You can't really see that immediately.
Oh, sure. Yep.
But, Moms gets removed. Then Giver gets in for 1 because can't protect anything. Can't protect itself, so it's coming in. And then I, off the top, draw Teferi Time Raveler. And this turn, I think, is a pretty easy just Ledger Shredder go. Not a lot of thinking to do here, I don't think. I guess the question here is, do I fetch and shock? And I don't remember what I did. It looks like I did not. So I just played an island and then the Ledger Shredder.
Yeah, I'm not really in a hurry to crack this fetch land either because you do want to hit land number 5 with this Planeswalker in your hand. So thinning is a small percentage either way, but keep your small percentage when you want the land and then take away your small percentage when you don't.
Then my opponent, March of Otherworldly Lights, my Ledger Shredder. So that also bites the dust, sadly.
At least Teferi's going to eat here. We've got a meal, a nice little tapped creature to send back.
Yeah, I actually don't remember what I did. I hope I did that. I feel like that is the right line for sure. And here I did draw another land for turn. I'm updating my hand down at the bottom here. So at this point, I guess I probably don't fetch at this point because... Actually, let's find out what I do. I don't even know. I guess you could also make an argument for a Skyclave Apparition here, but I think Teferi is probably the line, right?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because
Yeah.
my knee jerk, you all saw it happen live, was, oh good, Teferi gets to eat. But there's a couple things happening here. The first one is do you fetch or play plains?
Yep.
And at this point, the fetch land is basically just thinning. You're going to get
Yeah.
Hallowed Fountain because it's blue to Delta. It can't get a plains even if you wanted that. So do we think we're going to lose this game by 2 life points? Or do we think we're going to lose this game because we run out of action and we want to take our small percentage of thinning?
Right.
And whether you play Apparition or Teferi on this board, it's going to be they're nothing to your 3 lands and a permanent. And it might be a good opportunity to lose 2 life unless we just absolutely want to protect every point of life with everything we have. And knowing the cube, knowing the format, like, is there, like, how big of a creature can come out of this Luris deck? Do they have, like, Corrupt at the top end? Or I'm just trying to think of some crazy spell that can just dome us where 2 life is going to matter later. Or are they going to win or lose by a lot?
Seeing the white and black and no other splashes at this point, there's probably nothing that's going to like sneak out of nowhere. There's not going to be any combat tricks or anything like that that are going to like steal the game or direct damage. The biggest creatures, this deck could play Scourge of a Skyclaves or something like that. That is a 2-drop but can theoretically be huge, but you'll have a turn to see that coming at least. So, I think my logic here was that based on what's in my hand, I'm not going to need my 4th mana next turn, and so that seemed like a free window to fetch up a land and not take damage, which is, I guess, why I led on the plains here. And then, talk me through Teferi versus Skyclave Apparition here. Is it just that Giver of Runes is not that important and we want to save Skyclave for something that has to be removed?
So here's what I'm thinking. After my initial knee-jerk of Teferi bounce, easy play, I'm thinking we can Skyclave, eat this thing forever. If they clear Skyclave, they just get a 1/1 out of it. Right. Whereas they just replay Giver next turn, and we have this Planeswalker that's doing very little at that point. But if we save Teferi, if we Skyclave their 1/1, or their 1-drop, we have a 2/2 in play. And then at some point in the future, we can Teferi our own Skyclave, go up 2 cards, give them just a 1/1, and then eat a 2-drop. Or maybe even eat Luris down the road.
Yeah, so, I just thought about that line right now, too, is that you can bounce your own stuff with Teferi, and the 1/1 is such a small downside here. Downgrading that Giver of Runes to a vanilla 1/1 is a huge downgrade, so even if you give them back something later on, that seems like the better line, actually, now that I think about it.
Right, and even if they kill Skyclave before we can pick it back up with Teferi, then Teferi later will bounce a more expensive thing than this card. Teferi could even bounce the token that they get off killing the Skyclave, and then they're just out all of it. So I actually think we want Skyclave here.
Yeah, I agree talking it through now, but I did not do that. I was, maybe level 1ing and just like, oh, here's a spot where I can... I think I definitely... One thing I really struggle with is I feel like if I am able to look at all of the options, I feel like I'm pretty good at deciding which the right one is strategically. I feel like I never know. I miss things all the time, right? I know those 2 cards. I know them like the back of my hand. I play them in my cube all the time. I know that interaction exists, but it didn't occur to me here because I just wasn't looking for it, and I was just playing with the heuristic of let's get a Planeswalker into play on what will be an empty board, because Planeswalker on empty board equals good, which obviously is not great. So I struggle with missing stuff like that sometimes. But anyway, I did play the Teferi and bounce the Giver of Runes, which was my line here. So for better or worse, that's where we're at.
Yep. And just real quick, going back to the question about is 2 life going to break this game? One of the big creatures that you named was Scourge of the Skyclaves, which cares about life total. So that's just at least 1 tick in the direction of just play your planes here and don't get too crazy. And our hand right now is 3-drop, 5-drop. So we have a clear window next turn, unless we draw a 4-drop or a 1-drop, to fetch our Hallowed Fountain for just ETB tapped, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and at least something to do the next 2 turns, lands to get to our 5-drop. 5-drop on curve is good. Let's see what my opponent does here. They play a Marsh Flats, crack it. I can also try and scrub through a little more quickly here because I know there's some table talk. Let's see. I scrub too much. So they get an untapped Godless Shrine, also take damage off of their Silent Clearing to replay the Giver of Runes and put Luris into their hand is what they did. So that was how they used their mana that turn. Luris into hand, Giver of Runes back into play.
Right. So let's rebuild this board from if we had gone with Skyclave Apparition last turn.
Right.
So they don't have a Giver to replay. Maybe they just put Luris in hand. They don't know Teferi's coming. We can Teferi, pick up Skyclave, be up a card. Their 1/1 will be around to pick off Teferi, but I think he's done his job, unless we're expecting tons of busted instants out of this deck, which it doesn't seem like that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the squeaky clean line of Luris Deadweight isn't available to them because our 2/2's out of play.
Yes. Yeah. And we are playing with the, obviously, updated companion rules, so they have to do the 2 turns. They put Luris in their hand this turn, so it would have taken a little while to get to that. But I also like it now. Also looking at this, it seems like the other reason the Apparition would have been a really good line is I would just be attacking here, right? Like depending on what else they had in hand, they're already taking a lot of damage from their lands. They've got a Silent Clearing as one of their lands. They've fetched and shocked, so putting them actually under a little bit of pressure is not unreasonable. So
right, attack for 2. There is no Giver of Runes in play, and they just wished for their Luris, and you just picked up a permanent that answers Luris.
Yeah.
So now you're in a cat and mouse game of, or no pun intended, a cat and mouse game of when can they play their Luris, knowing that you're holding Skyclave Apparition to clear Luris, versus what I suspect is about to happen of you Skyclave the Giver because you're out of removal, and they easily Luris kill it just for free, and you don't have a good answer to Luris.
I can tell you that is exactly what happens, and I don't even like. So I actually like. What do you do here, knowing that is like what? So we drew planes for turn, getting a little flooded here. What is your line? Obviously, be uptick to fair. No other options there. Do you play the Skyclave? I mean, you need to get rid of the Giver, otherwise it can just protect Luris anyway.
Right.
It feels like a tough spot. I don't know. I did just play it out. I'm like 95% sure. Let's see. I played the Polluted Delta as we talked about. Yeah, I did play out the Skyclave Apparition and take the Giver, and then use this as an opportunity to painlessly get my fetch land or my dual land. But yeah, now it's a free Luris Deadweight. Like,
right. But you have to clear the Giver. At this point, we missed the line to exile it forever, and now Luris is going to get its free meal.
Yeah.
But you're going to shove I guess you're not, like, shoving Teferi isn't even that good because they can just deadweight your token unless you can draw a card immediately.
You're basically foreseeing the end of this game. Yeah, that is what I end up doing, and I actually just kind of forgot about the deadweight, believe it or not, because I'm an idiot. And also, like, part of it is that when I get on the back foot, I'm like, well, because I'll tell you, I draw 2 more lands in the next 2 turns, so I'm just flooded out, nothing to do but play Teferi anyway. And I think on the board we can even just kind of fast forward to that. You've already, kind of projected what's going to happen these next couple turns. Here comes Luris, here comes the Deadweight, then they get their 1/1 token. I think what I should have done in hindsight, which I was just kind of blinded by, I'm so far behind, this feels unwinnable, that I like downticked without really thinking about the Deadweight. What I should have done, I think, is uptick Teferi, which at least makes it so they can't kill it. They can put it to 1. I get a card back for my trouble, which is nice, and then get a card back again next turn unless they have some other removal spell or some haste creature in their hand, which would have been at least something. Better than the obvious play of you get to deadweight this and just attack it and kill my planeswalkers, which is what I ended up doing, which obviously is no good.
Right. So, yeah, you said a bunch of important stuff there, and the just rebuilding this game, I don't want to harp on this, but just that one decision of Skyclave Apparition versus Teferi
was huge.
You had to waste a second thing on the Giver that came down for 1 mana. Luris is going to run unopposed, where we could have been holding a removal spell, and Luris is going to kill 2 things for free instead of 0, or just sit in their hand until it has something better to do, which is probably what this game would have looked like, at which point you jam your Planeswalker onto an empty board. So that's everything. But even now that we're here, what you just said of, I'm behind, I just got to start doing stuff, that's also a common mistake that people have of, I mean, looking at it now, this is why I ask my coaching clients to bring video rather than play live over your shoulder. These are real things that you did with all of
Oh
your
yeah.
mental faculties focused on this game, and you just put a 2/2 into play immediately after having your 2/2 dead weighted from the graveyard,
Right.
and it's still there for next turn.
The last turn,
And,
yeah. It wasn't even
right.
like it happened a long time ago. Like the idea that I missed that and just saw that, okay, well, now my good Planeswalker is just dead. Like I did nothing. 5 mana, make you waste a black mana next turn and like use one of your Luris activations. Like that's nothing. So definitely
Right.
a huge punt to end this game here.
Yeah,
And then I draw Memory Lapse, and maybe this is a preliminary scoop, but what does he do next turn? Because obviously he dead weights my thing. Kills my Planeswalker, and then I think he plays something else, and I draw Memory Lapse and have a hand of, land, Memory Lapse against a board, and I think he also has like 4 or 5 cards in hand still because he's been doing Luris stuff. I actually just scooped this one up and was like, also, honestly, I scooped it up because I was also frustrated because I punted so bad. I was like, well, that's annoying. So why am I going to really try and play this game from this far behind or just let it go?
Yeah, so it can kill your Temporal Archmage or Temporal Pilgrim no matter what, because it doesn't have a plus, it's a 0. Or it's when you draw a card, it gets loyal. So it's not a plus, but it is effectively a plus. Okay, so yeah, draw a card, puts Big Teferi up to 5.
Yeah.
They put it to 1.
Yeah.
You go to your turn, you draw, Teferi gets loyalty.
Yep.
You 0, Teferi gets loyalty.
Yep.
They probably actually have to attack Teferi Time Reveler with Luris this turn and not Temporal Pilgrim, because that's another card next turn. That should be on 3, right? It's been 2 turns since you bounced something.
This is the turn it will tick up to. He attacked it with the illusion last turn as well. It was at 3, but he killed the big Teferi with Luris and then illusioned the small Teferi.
Okay, so I think Luris probably would have taken little Teferi off the board, and you have big Teferi at pretty high life total or loyalty total, and you're up at least 2 cards from where you end up scooping this game. Your deck, there's not a Supreme Verdict, there's not a Terminus. We don't have any big bangers like that, but even like Timeless Dragon, Murktide Regent, Wandering Emperor just gets us completely stable. We had draws here, and
I think we for sure we had draws if I hadn't made the Teferi punt, and then this is the point. This is literally all Memory Lapse here, and I'm just like, all right, well, I'm done, because he played a Blade of the Oni, a 3/1 last turn, so now he's got 7 power in play against my land counterspell that buys a little bit of time. Maybe there's an out from this spot, but I was over it. I was over this game. I did not do so hot.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, the Blade gives Luris Menace as well, and just 5 lifelink Menace. Yeah. All their best draws I just named are a bunch of big dragons, but they're all just 1 creature.
Yeah, and looking at this life total, I think the person managing life totals also missed a lifelink on Luris. They should be at 17, not 14. So, this game was kind of a wrap, but it's really interesting looking at it now, and I definitely knew that the like Teferi downtick was a huge punt. Like that was obvious in the moment. I had not processed that sequencing the apparition into small Teferi would have been a million times better than the way I did sequence it. So like very clearly this game was one where I was like kind of on the back foot for most of it, but it hinged on those 2 big decisions that I made the wrong decision in both places, which cost me the game.
Right. And Luris Gaming specifically, Luris is banned in all the formats I like at this point.
Yeah.
But I remember the feeling of playing with and against Luris, where it's like the scene in the first Fast and the Furious where Brian and Dom race for the first time, and then Brian like shoots the Nas, and Dom's like, "Too early, kid," and then like hits the Nas later and wins the race.
Yeah,
and
I remember
Luris is your Nas tank, and you always have to be just like running your race, knowing that your opponent still could hit their Nas button.
Yes,
and floating that Skyclave apparition, like you have to deal with the giver, or else Luris is just going to stick. But finding the line that navigates to a world where Luris is killable has to be at the front of your mind at all times when you play against Luris, because that's exactly what happened.
That's another thing I really don't love about this deck is it's pretty light on removal for what I would want this deck to be. Like in place of what I would want to be removal spells, it instead has like 3 mana Thalia and these other creatures that are just kind of like definitely not at their best here. So I have like Portable Hole, Prismatic Ending, and then like the Planeswalkers to interact with things, and maybe one other thing. But definitely light on interaction. So like knowing that I'm already down a Skyclave Apparition, knowing that I've already done a Skyclave Apparition, there's not a ton of ways to get rid of Lurrus that are left in my deck. My chance of drawing one is not super duper high.
Yeah,
So
your decks outs to Lurrus are genuinely Skyclave Apparition, Wandering Emperor, and bounce it, then counter it on the way back down.
yeah,
Because Portable Hole misses it. Prismatic Ending, you can only make 2 colors. We had one of our 2 outs just in a cool way to work around it while drawing extra cards, and that's where this game broke down for sure.
yeah. At least I'll take a little bit of solace in the fact that your gut reaction was, hey, we played Teferi here, and then you thought about it for 2 seconds more and realized that's actually wrong.
Right.
At least your gut was, your first impression was in the line I actually took. That gives me some peace. So I have an opportunity to sideboard here. I'm not sure I actually gave you a picture of my sideboard. I do have a Terminus in the sideboard.
Okay.
I also have a Force Spike and a Mercurial Spell Dancer. Talk about cards that are really not being optimized here. And I think like one other on-color thing. I actually, and this is maybe, sideboarding maybe also a big hole of mine, I didn't sideboard at all for game 2, given that I was on the play now. And my logic was that Terminus is probably pretty good against him, obviously, but also my deck does have aggressive starts and has a fair number of creatures for a deck that otherwise would play a Wrath. So I'm not sure if you would cut something from that list in that spot for Terminus or for Spike or both or what.
Yeah, I would have Terminus in for sure. You do have some creatures you can come out aggressive, but you also don't have to cast Terminus if you draw it.
Right.
But you can't draw to it if it's not there. Like I even said, without knowing you had a Terminus in your board, like, we're not drawing to a Terminus here.
Yeah.
And Terminus specifically is great against Lurrus because it doesn't put things in the graveyard.
Yeah, there's some amount of us thinking about sideboards here. Let's kind of scrub forward a little bit. All right, so now we can talk opening hands. This is my opening hand for this game, which I also kept, and also seems good to me. So Stoneforge Mystic can go and get Skull Clamp and also Glimmerlens or Glimmerlens, and we'll talk about that decision maybe when it comes up. But I felt like 4 lands is maybe a little bit much, but I do have 2 fetch lands and then just spells to cast early. How do you feel about this hand compared to like the hand in the previous game?
I think they're both good. We see a similar thing here, which is some sort of threatening play that they'd like to remove into Ledger Shredder, and then something that resembles a removal spell and enough lands to cast it all.
Yeah.
And this hand specifically, because Stoneforge Mystic can tutor Skull Clamp, you are going to get to connive with Shredder. On turn 3, you go Shredder Skull Clamp, and you get a connive. So there's a little extra motion where one of your critiques of your last hand was this Shredder's never going to trigger. Where this one, you have a straight line into it.
Yeah. This game is also very different, I will say. It goes on a lot longer, so we have a lot different kinds of decisions to talk about here. Let's see what I led on in terms of lands. I don't remember here. I think we're talking through mulligans right now. I'm just kind of fast-forwarding.
I do think this hand is a pretty clean fetch Hallowed Fountain tapped situation.
Yep. I did fetch. Let's see what I got. I think I might have gotten the Irrigated Farmland, maybe. Let's see what it ends up being. I did get the farmland. So yeah, okay. You're saying Hallowed Fountain here especially because I do have 4 lands in my hand, a lot more likely, and my hand is perfect. So if I draw the irrigated farmland, I'm almost certainly going to be cycling it anyway. So
yeah, you have access to everything you need that's going to cast a spell in this game. And now if you top deck Hallowed Fountain, it's like, great, I'm flooding out. But if you top deck farmland, which is the 1-for-1 exchange, exactly what we've talked about here, okay, I get another shot at this. Yeah. So yes, I would have fetched Hallowed Fountain there all day.
Yeah, I definitely see that in hindsight. My opponent leads on Horizon Canopy Deathrite Shaman, which is an interesting opening given the last game, because we saw no green last game, and now we see Horizon Canopy being the first land. And then Deathrite Shaman is obviously, I feel like, just a nightmare for my deck to deal with, given that I have no removal in hand, and it just kind of... I already have a fetch land in the graveyard, which is not great either. But, yeah, I was not feeling great about their start.
I did notice that you were already in your deck looking for your land before your opponent made their opening play.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you're not gonna, like, not cast Stoneforge Mystic, but the fact that they cast Deathrite Shaman when you could have for free not put a land in your graveyard this turn,
Yeah.
like, and you're gonna do it in this spot, but and I know like friendly game, you're just taking shortcuts, but
Well,
uh,
also, I think, part of this is that for whatever reason, I think for the reasons I've mentioned before, I was like, oh, I probably get irrigated farmland here because it's going to come into tapped anyway. I don't need the mana. So I think that was another reason why I just did it on my turn, because I was like, well, I already know I'm going to do. I have no like 1 mana things to hold up, and I wanted to obviously untap and have it next turn to play a 2-drop. But yeah, definitely. The optimal thing is obviously wait till the last minute, but like you said, shortcuts, playing in paper, and shuffling and whatnot was part of that decision for sure.
Yeah, I do think people in general take they get a bad case of instant speeditis, which is just because something's an instant, you wait till your opponent's end step to do it. When a lot of times, like main phase is the correct time to opt or brainstorm.
I have that a lot with specifically the Wandering Emperor. There are so many times where I'm like, ooh, an instant speed Planeswalker. This is going to be so great. And there are situations where I just should have main phased it, and I didn't because I was like, instant speed is better. I definitely...
like the creature that you want is already tapped
yes.
from attacking last turn, and now you let them untap into interaction or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. I've definitely suffered that particular flaw before.
Yeah, in this spot, luckily, the shortcut doesn't come with any sort of punish because we're just shoving Stoneforge Mystic anyway. Your opponent's going to get an extra mana, but luckily they're a deck that we know is not going to cast a 3-drop.
Yeah, so I did play a Stoneforge Mystic. Now, I think I even say on the audio when I'm talking to my opponent right now, I'm like, here's where Brian is going to tell me that I'm supposed to get Skull Clamp because it's broken and banned everywhere. I actually got Glimmerlens, which is probably not... I imagine you will tell me it's not the right decision. My logic was that for turn I drew Mother of Runes for what it's worth, which is notable maybe. The reason I got Glimmerlens was just because I felt like against his deck, a 2/2 was going to be so valuable, especially a 2/2 I can just like flash it at instant speed. Like next turn I can hold up Petty Theft or activate Stoneforge Mystic and put the Glimmerlens in. And also does represent card advantage if I'm ahead on board, and I do have, 4 1 and 2 mana creatures in my hand, or 1, 2, and 3 mana creatures in my hand. That was my logic behind it. Are you just like, Skull Clamp is broken, why are we not getting Skull Clamp? Because it makes all of our threats, die into 2 cards?
No, I'm not going to say that. And I may end up that I still like Skull Clamp, but I'm not going to say it for that reason.
Okay.
That's a big... I don't want to say pet peeve, but a big learning opportunity for the community at large for me, where I'll play like some legacy lands deck with a very specific engine it's trying to get online, and all the comments are like, "No Tabernacle." It's like, I'm a Field of the Dead deck. Why the hell would I have Tabernacle in my deck? Just because a card is flashy and expensive or banned in places doesn't mean you have to play it, and doesn't mean you have to shove it into play if you happen to draw it. Which I think is what happened last game with the Teferi. We got excited about the Mythic Rare Planeswalker, or I guess that one's just a regular rare. Thanks for the spark.
Wildly, it's a regular rare.
Right, versus the Oblivion Ring. We're like, hell yeah, Planeswalker over the weird Oblivion Ring, but the weird Oblivion Ring was the right play.
Yeah.
But so here in this spot, what I really like about Skull Clamp is that it triggers Ledger Shredder. Yeah. But we drew Mother of Runes, which does that too.
Yeah.
So we don't need a 1-drop anymore. And I do kind of like the Glimmerlens. I like that both of the equipment in the deck draw cards. And kind of what I'm thinking, rather than... so you were talking about play Mother of Runes and then hold up either Brazen Borrower or put in Glimmerlens, which that's a pretty good turn 3. We could also play Ledger Shredder and Mother of Runes, get our Connive value, and then hold on to that equipment for down the road.
And I don't know which one I did, to be honest, so we'll find out together.
Well, we shouldn't know yet, because what our opponent does on his turn is going to inform all of those decisions.
Right, exactly.
But I do like that Glimmerlens gives you a bunch of different trees to make decisions from, where Skull Clamp really only does one thing.
I will say the other thing I thought here, and I'm curious if you think this holds any water, was I definitely take a note mentally when my opponent leads on a Horizon land, a Pain land, a note being that they probably don't have many more lands in their hand, because if you usually want to play those lands later so you take less damage off of them, or, so you have an opportunity to cycle them. So I think my other thought was maybe they will get a little bit stuck on mana and I can just overwhelm them with creatures in these first few turns of the game. Does that hold any water, you think, or no?
I tend to both build and play my decks to raise my floor, not my ceiling. And what I mean by that is, how bad can this turn go for me and how do I mitigate it is what's in my head.
Gotcha.
And not what happens if they miss their land drop. How do I punish the hardest?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I want more information. If it's turn 4 and my opponent still has 2 lands and passes the turn, that's blood in the water. I'm willing to push a little harder.
Sure.
But at the same time, if you push too hard and then you get got by Mana Tithe or something against an opponent who's stuck on 2 lands, when you could have just waited or built out a little slower, or built out a little more stably, that frequently ends up biting you all the same. Like, I play tight and conservative when I don't know what's going on, and I play tight and conservative when I'm ahead because I don't want to lose that game.
Yeah.
And I only really get fast and loose kind of whipping crap at the wall when I'm way behind and I just need something to work. Like, throw that Hail Mary.
Yeah, I feel like that's even just a very good lesson. What you said at the beginning was like, don't worry about like trying to max punish somebody that is already stumbling. Like, whatever line you were going to take that was good, if they did something strong, is probably also still a decent line. That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So they go Giver of Runes, Blade of the Oni here on the back of their 3rd mana from Deathrite Shaman, which is good. Two more creatures.
We kind of zoomed through it, but your observation about the Horizon Canopy is a really good one, because they just played Swamp, which could have cast Deathrite Shaman last turn without dealing them damage. And they did need the Horizon Canopy to play Giver, but that's not what they played last turn. So I do think that Swamp came off the top, and they saw your fetch land before they made a decision, but they wouldn't have seen that before the Mulligan decision. But I guess you would keep 1-landers on the draw with Deathrite Shaman in your Lurrus deck. And their hands full of 1-drops. So I do think that they drew that Swamp for turn, and I think that we can operate under that assumption. Though it's not like we have a Wasteland or...
Right, yeah.
We do have a Thalia Heretic Cathar in our deck somewhere, but I don't know how many non-basic lands this cube contains that they're likely to play. So it's not like we could do a lot with that information, except the important thing is we can now assume that all of the cards in their hand are spells.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's the one thing I didn't track, which I kind of wish I did. I don't know how many cards are in my opponent's hand. I mean, we could figure it out at this point in the game, but this game ends up being kind of long, and I did not track that information carefully, so we'll have to kind of fly blind on that particular detail. The other thing about Deathrite Shaman, I think this is a card that in like the MTGO cube environments or whatever really underperforms, because you're not that lucky to have a fetch land in your deck or a land in your graveyard. Here, with 20 fetch lands plus Prismatic Vista, so there's 21 fetch lands in the cube that we open every single time we draft with 8 people, the card is cracked. It's it's as good as it was in Legacy pre-banning, I think, in this environment, because it's so easy for you or your opponent to have a land in the graveyard to make mana with it. So it's good.
Yep, that makes sense. And your opponent, if they kept 7, should have 4 cards left in hand that at this point we should assume are all spells.
Yeah. So I draw Murktide Regent for turn. Classic Murktide Regent, no instants and sorceries in my hand. kind of turn.
Right.
And I did
it looks
take
like
the
we are
Ledger
taking the
Shredder
Connive line.
Mother of Runes line is what I ended up doing. I think mostly because wasn't excited about bouncing any of that stuff anyway with the Petty Theft. So the Connive value seems good. Also 4 toughness on this board if I discard non-land, which I didn't because I drew another Plains off the Connive trigger. So let me pause this real quick and catch up my hand. So I played Plains for turn. I played Mother of Runes, I played Ledger Shredder, and I drew another Plains, which I then discarded to the Connive. So this is my hand after I drew from the Connive, and I assume you would discard Plains in this spot as well?
Yeah, you're kind of... the Stoneforge isn't in your hand, right? That's in play.
Oh, right. Sorry.
That should be the equipment.
That is the Glimmer Lens. You're right. Actually, here, one sec. I had somebody helping me out writing down all of the hidden information. That's not Glimmerlands. So I didn't have them note things that were visible like Glimmerlands, but we do need that in my hand here. So great, yes, that is my hand when I hit the Connive, and I end up discarding the planes because I don't want to discard action, and also, I mean, maybe there's an argument with already having double blue to discarding the Scalding Tarn here, but I didn't. I just pitched the planes.
Yeah, Scalding Tarn, and you take 1 life, but you could have access to Hallowed Fountain if you need that.
Yeah.
I don't know that the thinning is actually that important when you have Ledger Shredder and Glimmerlens going. There is a reasonable argument to discard Scalding Tarn instead of planes, but it's a small one.
Yeah.
But compared to any of the spells in your,
I think it's also
you're pretty clearly keeping the spells.
Yeah, also, like, if I need the blue, I'll just Scalding Tarn for an island. So they're only talking about 1 life here instead of 3. Though
we are talking about 2 mana from Deathrite Gemin, because if we discard Scalding Tarn, we don't have to fetch and give them another Deathrite Gemin target to get our 4th mana, because it's just
that
planes from hand.
Is true. I didn't think about that. I was like, oh, a land's going to the graveyard anyway. It doesn't matter if I fetch or if I discard, but it does matter because if the Scalding Tarn gets to the graveyard by discarding it, then it's just 1 less card that, yeah.
Yeah, we already think that they are out of land drops, and we think that Swamp came off the top, and the decision that was just made gives them 2 Deathrite activations instead of 1 over the next.
Yeah, so that actually was
yeah, that did matter.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, that did matter. Good point. All right. Yeah, I did. That's kind of funny to think about because it's like it's going to be the Scalding Tarn in the graveyard anyway. But the important thing is that planes did not have to go to the graveyard. It could have just never been there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then we're fully in the part of the game where I have no idea what they did on this turn. They are making mana with my discarded land. They're casting Night's Whisper, drawing some cards. I assume it's pretty safe to fast forward when I'm F6'd. Nothing I could possibly do.
I mean, they're likely to trigger your Ledger Shredder, probably, if they want to keep their velocity going. So you might have a decision to make here, but that's it.
Here I do have a decision because they do attack with the Blade of the Oni, which I am almost certain I did not block and can't imagine why I would block. It's a 3/1 menace, so I'd have to offer them their choice of 2 of my creatures, and I think the 3 life is fine at this point of the game.
Yeah, I would not give them Ledger Shredder for this. They're not worried about Stoneforge Mystic. Casting Glimmerlens is the same as activating Stoneforge, so...
All right, then they do play a second card, and it is Sun Gold Sentinel. They were talking through it and thinking about whether they were going to do They briefly revealed Kitesail Freebooter, but ended up playing Sun Gold Sentinel instead. And if I don't miss my Connive trigger... Did I miss my Connive trigger here?
Looks like it.
Yeah, I didn't see myself draw a card. I had the list of all the cards I drew in order, but it looks like I might have just missed that, which is bad. So don't miss triggers, kids. That's another good lesson.
Right, and if we had remembered this Connive trigger, I think Murktide Regent is actually a pretty easy discard right now because they have 2 ways to pressure your graveyard, and this thing's never coming into play.
Well, it's funny because what I would have connived away, what I would have drawn would have been Timeless Dragon, which could have just been connived away and then eternalized before they could untap and do anything with it. Which
that's true.
Which
I'm kind of into 5/5 dragon mode this game. We're 1 mana away from just playing it on the front, and it's a big old beastie with Mother of Runes backing it up. Yeah, I would have connived away Murktide Regent and just assumed it's never going to happen for me.
Yeah. Well, 1 miss trigger. Good to know. That is one thing I'm definitely, embarrassed to just miss triggers, and it's hard. I only play in paper, and I definitely feel it where cards are complicated these days, and it's oftentimes feels like a lot of mental energy to keep up with my triggers, especially because, compared to someone that plays a constructed deck maybe, where you've got your 12 or 15 uniquely named cards that, are in your deck that have rules text that you have to care about. This cube is singleton. I also play tons of different cubes. Part of why I wanted to do this coaching session is because I used to play a ton of retail limited back like before COVID-19, like pre-2020. Would like draft at the local game store every week, and listen to limited resources, and like kind of spike retail limited as much as I could. And it was very satisfying to like feel myself getting better in each like limited format or whatever. And then I've gotten really into Cube, and also frankly the local like retail limited scene has just fallen off. Like the LGS can't fire a pod reliably these days after reopening after the pandemic. So now I play Paper Cube a couple times a week every week, but to date this year, I have played 21 unique cubes, and then a couple of them, multiple times. But I don't like play the same environment every week. I'm playing like different environments every week with different cards, and I feel like it's hard for me to know if I'm even improving as a player anymore at all, because I don't really have a way to measure that, right? So that's part of why I wanted to do a coaching session like this, is because I want like to make concrete steps towards trying to improve as a player, even though I'm playing in this way that is maybe a little more scattered than other people.
I think that the way that you are playing Magic right now actually leans into the advice that I give folks who find themselves missing triggers or missing onboard interactions and stuff, which is anytime something changes about the battlefield, like whether something's put on the stack or even if someone activates a fetch land, just look at every single permanent for a second.
Yeah.
And every card in your hand and think, does this interact with this? Just, you could do it pretty quickly, but like if you were just in the habit of taking 2 seconds to
just read
look
the cards,
at the whole battlefield.
Just read the cards. I tell myself,
you know
this
what the
all
cards
time.
do. You play a ton of Magic. Like you built this cube, you chose Ledger Shredder for this cube for the abilities that it has. It's not because you didn't read the card.
Yeah.
It's that in that moment, you were not thinking about the depth of that card. You double spelled on your turn and got your Connive.
Yes.
And just the second layer of that, which is whenever any player plays 2 spells, just slipped away. It's like a little bit of tunnel vision and then a little bit of, I don't know if it's shortcutting or just like you're already thinking about next turn, or you're thinking about how you stabilize this board and missing what's happening right in front of you.
It's definitely a weakness of mine where like I'm sure I was thinking about like, what does Sun Gold Sentinel mean on this board, because that also can exile stuff from my graveyard. Like that feels like I get lost in the sauce sometimes and can't keep up. Anyway, on this turn I played Scalding Tarn and did nothing with this hand, given that I can hold up both Petty Theft and the Stoneforge activation to put Glimmer Lens into play, or theoretically Planeswalking Timeless Dragon, but I think I'm on the same plan as you, is like, let's just actually play a 5/5 this game, especially given that they have a Sun Gold Sentinel and a Deathrite Shaman to keep me from eternalizing unless I really thread the needle on that. I assume that's the play here.
So, real quick before we move on.
Yeah.
When even here, when you were narrating the game state for me, you're like, I'm just F6 here. And I pointed out you have Ledger Shredder.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're in the brain space of I'm just F6 here, just remember that sometimes your opponent's cards affect yours, and you're never really F6'd. But talking about this turn, and still talking about Ledger Shredder, Glimmer Lens, we don't care if that creature gets dead-weighted or whatever. If they spend time dealing with it, that might trigger our Ledger Shredder or cause them to double spell. And it's the same mana to put Glimmer Lens in off Stoneforge as it is to just cast it.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't Brazen Borrow anything except the Giver of Runes anyway. So I'm kind of on team main phase, Glimmer Lens, Brazen Borrow, bounce, Giver, give myself a
to
Connive.
Get the Connive trigger.
Right. This Murktide Regent sucks. It's never going to happen. And
Murktide Regent is really showing off why the deck is a little bit not focused right now, yeah.
I mean, like, you could have had a Murktide Regent if your opponent didn't start with a turn 1 graveyard hate piece and then play another one last turn. But at this point, the dream is dead on Murktide, and we're 1 mana away from just tapping 5 for 5/5 Timeless Dragon up front. And I want to hit that 5th land drop.
Yeah.
And we have an opportunity to connive here, grow Ledger Shredder, and maybe even start attacking, or at least put a 2/4. A Sun Gold thing, is that a 3/2?
It's a 3/2, yeah.
All right, so 2/4 in front of 3/2 is huge on this battlefield.
Yep.
And like if they didn't have Giver and we actually had choices to make with this Brazen Borrower, maybe I don't say sorcery speed it, but that's all we can do. And if they replay Giver, that's a 1-drop in a high velocity situation that's probably going to connive you again. So I
Yeah.
like going all main phase all day here.
Yeah, maybe it's another case of instant speed itis. I was
Yep.
definitely like, well, petty theft. I'm gonna want to like try and get them. Though obviously, like you said, really the only thing I can do is Giver of Runes. I guess the other thing I was thinking here is there any line where we end up just casting Brazen Borrower on end step instead of petty theft at all, and we want all 3 mana available to do that?
I don't think that's going to happen.
It's also
They have 0 flyers, and getting Glimmer Lens into play is another 2/2 on this board, and you can double block or you could if you Brazen Borrow on your turn, Giver's gone, and then you have Stoneforge plus Glimmer Lens with the Rebel counter on it to double block the Blade of the Oni, which beats it in combat, and then you can just re-equip Lens next turn if they take your 2/2. I think they just don't have attacks. If you main phase everything, discard Murktide, make a 2/4, and then you have 1/2, 2/4, 2/2 plus Mother of Runes against their Deathrite Gem and 3/1 and 3/2.
Yeah, hearing you talk about it out loud too. Also, the other like step I hadn't taken in my head was like, oh, Murktide Regent is so bad that I actively want to discard it here. Which, hearing you explain it, it makes a lot of sense. But I think part of me was like, these cards are all powerful, good cards. Like, conniving is always good, right? Like, I get the always connive if you can, but I think I maybe valued it lower than the instant speed on petty theft, which I agree, in hindsight, was a mistake. But I think that was a step I hadn't made. I hadn't been like, oh yeah, Murktide Regent is like near blank. Like, it's actively an awful card in this board state, and I would rather have literally anything else in my deck in my hand than Murktide Regent.
Right, including land, which we have a high impact 5-drop.
Yes.
And the Glimmer Lens is still likely to draw a card next turn, as long as it's in play, and how it gets there doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And this is a spot where limited is pretty different than constructed, because in constructed, I would kind of be like, every card is insane and chosen on purpose from all cards that could exist, and they have 4 copies of all their best ones, and maybe they think they're behind here and they cast a sweeper, and I would lose my Glimmer Lens for no reason if I jam it now, versus limited, where it's like every card's in the cube for a reason, but they don't necessarily have every busted card. We know their deck's only 2 drops.
Right.
How bad could it be? Bang, bang. I'm up a permanent, you're down a permanent. Brazen Borrower is on an adventure for next turn, and Ledger Shredder is now the biggest thing on the board by a lot.
Yeah, I think the whole picture of Murktide Regent is no good. The 2/4 is so big on this battlefield, right? Like, having it be 4 toughness and 2 power makes this combat hugely swings in my favor. Like, I hadn't like connected quite all those dots, and was, I guess, playing more to heuristics of like, well, let's not let my Glimmer Lens token get instant or sorcery speed removaled, and let's, hold up this petty theft because instant good. But you make very good points about how all those things do not make sense. And I'm noticing just a pattern of maybe me undervaluing conniving, just undervaluing triggering Ledger Shredder, when I should be looking at that more.
Yeah, the triggering the Ledger Shredder, getting card quality, because like we talked about, your deck is kind of confused. It doesn't have one coherent plan. It's like 1/3 of 3 different decks kind of pushed together. And right now, your Murktide Regent deck is not on the table.
Yes.
You're facing down 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate. Like, just turn that into something else. And your Cycle Timeless Dragon deck is off the table because of the 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate. So let's cast Timeless Dragon.
Yep.
And that requires land number 5, which conniving helps you find. There's just, your deck is actually firing on all cylinders here.
Yeah.
If we were firing the cylinders.
If the player was firing on all cylinders, but
right.
alas.
and not to beat this dead horse.
No,
but
do it. Beat my dead horse.
That Scalding Tarn that's in play Deathrite Shaman would be out of food, and your opponent would be playing this game on 2 lands and 2 mana, unless there's a land under their hand right now.
There is
Did
a
they
land
play
under their
through?
hand. They did play
Okay.
land last turn. They played a plains.
Okay, so they would have 3 mana instead of potentially 4 here.
Yeah. I guess maybe that was the other... it's funny, it's only 4 days ago. I can't remember what I was thinking. The other thing that would force me... I would be forced to give them that mana main phase with Deathrite Shaman if I had taken the line of play Glimmer Lens, play Petty Theft, because I would have to put the Scalding Tarn in the graveyard. Whereas here, holding up, activating Stoneforge Mystic on end step at least means they can't use that mana to cast a sorcery speed thing. But overall, I totally agree with your assessment, and that would have been the correct line. But those are maybe all the things that were at least running around my head when I decided to do nothing and pass.
Right.
All right. Kind of surprised at how little I remember what happens in this game from this point. I remember how it ends, but I don't remember how these turns play out.
Honestly, that's ideal. Like sometimes my coaching clients show up with things that are up to 3 weeks old and they barely even remember recording it. And we're living the dream in that case.
Yeah. So here, my opponent plays a Kitesail Freebooter, and I believe in response I do both the Glimmer Lens and the Petty Theft so that they just whiff on their Kitesail Freebooter, which is obvious, I think. Don't give them a card if I don't have to.
Yep, that's a good one. And they can't take Brazen Borrower. It's a creature, right?
Yes, yeah, it's a creature in hand.
So you don't even have to Petty Theft here. You could have left your fetch land uncracked.
Actually, did I do that? Maybe. Let's see. Let's see what's going here. I definitely played the Lens. Maybe past me is smarter than present me. No, I did Petty Theft here and just bounced the Giver because that's our only option.
Right. So in this spot, because Petty Theft in our heads is a bounce spell. Right. I understand why you would respond here, yeah. But it's actually a creature. And if we just let Booter resolve, look at our hand of 3 cards, and then now we're in a spot to end step bounce the Giver.
So they can't replay it, yeah.
Yeah, then they have 2 turns without Giver active. And now that you've no, it doesn't matter because the other thing wasn't a spell. So we're not conniving into the Booter here. So yes. It is going to miss.
Yeah, okay. We're not conniving no matter what, yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure what's going on here conversation-wise. But this does resolve, as I recall. That gets bounced. Some table talk about what Blade of the Oni does. Reveal that I have Dragon Tribal in my hand and they can't do anything about it. They're thinking whether they have any attacks. They do replay the Giver, and this time I do remember my Connive trigger. I'm nothing if not inconsistent. And off that Connive trigger, I draw Thalia. Let's update my hand here. Sorry about my dog. The mailman is here, so she's going to go ballistic for a second. Sadie, come here. Stop it. You're being a bad girl. I draw Thalia off of the Connive here. And I assume my opponent decided they weren't going to attack because I can't imagine why they would give me a Connive trigger before they attack. That would make no sense. So I don't know. I'm not sure whether they explicitly said it was second main phase or if...
And they have the attack exile a thing trigger. And if they force you to connive pre-combat, you don't get to discard Timeless Dragon for free.
That is true. I did discard the Murktide Regent, which I'm glad I did because... It's 100% obvious correct choice from this seat. I don't know how obvious it was to me at the time, but I did pitch that. So hand is now Thalia, Timeless Dragon. Looks like they are going to attack.
Yeah, so that has protection from something from the Giver activation, and you have a white creature, a blue creature, and a red creature.
Protection from blue, if memory serves. And I think I chose not to block here again. Yeah, I didn't block here again. So yeah, they gave it pro blue so that I couldn't block it with a Ledger Shredder, I think. So I had to, if I wanted to block it, double block with Mother of Runes and the Rebel token, and then I could protect Mother of Runes if I was gambling they didn't have a removal spell and just trade the Rebel token for the Blade of the Oni, but I didn't want to like bank on them. There's a ton of like 1 mana black removal in this cube, right? Like so many things they could have. We know about Deadweight from last game. They could also have just Bloodchief's Thirst or Ulcerate or Disfigure or Cast Down or anything. So I chose not to block.
Yeah, I think having Mother untapped here is the way to go because you've invested a turn 2 decision and then multiple turns of play into getting this Glimmer Lens into play to start drawing cards. And it's time to pay that out and don't risk losing your Mother of Runes and or that for 3 damage.
Yeah. And now they do use the mana from the Deathrite Shaman off of the Scalding Tarn to play a Thraben Inspector. So they're doing all kinds of stuff. Then we untap, and for turn we draw Polluted Delta. So we do have 5th land here to just drop the Dragon.
Yep.
There's the Polluted Delta. Sacrifice it. Go and get... what did I get here? So I already have the Irrigated Farmland in play. I guess the question is, do I get Island or Hallowed Fountain? I'm already at 11. Sitting here today, I would probably just get an Island. Okay, that's what I did. That's what I did in the past, too.
Yeah, there's no triple white in your deck.
Yeah.
You're not in too much danger of needing to double spell. Like, unless you draw a white card to go with your Thalia, you could still double spell, and your deck's not that high velocity anyway, so I don't think we're worried about that.
Yeah. And I just dropped the Dragon. The question is, so the way you were talking, it was like, oh, we obviously attack here, and I'm wondering if I did. Talk me through why the attack is so obvious to draw a card. Let's see if I did it first, I guess, maybe. What did I end up doing here? I thought about it for a while, for better or worse. I reread Blade of the Oni, because he can also reconfigure Blade of the Oni to make something into a 5/5 next turn, which is something.
I don't know that a 5/5 is better on this board than an additional 3/1.
Yeah, nice long pause here. So
the life totals aren't quite on the screen for me, but what
really?
is their life total?
They have 14. I'm at 11. I'm surprised you can't see the life totals. What's up with that? I don't know why the life totals aren't on the screen. Weird. Yeah, I'm at 11. They were 14. Sorry about that. And I'm thinking for a long time here whether or not I'm going to attack. So what do you do in this spot?
So
it looks like I ended up passing the turn. Let's see. I did just pass. So I did not attack. Let's talk through this, though. So I definitely thought about it for a long time, and I also, sitting here right now, don't know what I would do.
Can we just back up a second so the board's
their card is actually tapped? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
So we've got 1/2, 3/2, 1/2, and 1/2.
1/2 flyer, yeah.
Okay, so if we were to attack with Rebel and Ledger Shredder, I'm just talking through possible attacks here. It's 11 to 14. You draw a card, 100%, just +1. And then their options are trade their 3/2 or double block with Booter and Thraben Inspector, and then you pick off one of those of your choosing.
Yep.
They're not going to block with Giver.
Yeah.
And in that world they take 2 and they lose an actual permanent. You're up 1 card and you can re-equip your equipment next turn. And you still have 5/5, 1/2, and Mother activation back. They have a maximum of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. If they were to make all their creatures unblockable and then activate Deathrite Gemin, you are exactly dead, which seems unlikely that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And they're untapping into active Giver, which means that You just don't get good attacks anymore.
It definitely makes combat a lot worse, yeah.
Right. And you could also pro white your rebel, because all their blockers except for Booter are white. And pro white your rebel, get in for 4, draw a card. You have 5/5 and 1/2 back. But then your mother's tapped. Do we know how many cards are in their hand at this point?
I didn't track that carefully. No, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Good notes
Like
for
that-
next time. They're not hellbent. I remember that much. I think it was part of why I was thinking so hard here. I would guess like a couple cards in hand, but not. Let me see if I can catch a glimpse in maybe one of these video things. But
Right. So my concern here is you don't beat aggro decks with removal spells. You beat aggro decks with bigger creatures and killing them. And we're not making an effort to kill them here. I feel like at least Ledger Shredder should have turned sideways, even if the Rebel doesn't.
okay.
Like, unless you're worried about them equipping Booter with Blade and you want to keep 2 blockers back for the Menace Flyer. But if they attack with that thing, you're getting back in for 7 in the air next turn.
Yeah.
I think we need to be seriously considering racing at this point and where we can get a point or 2 through without giving up the board. If we can draw a card off the Glimmer Lens without giving up the board. And they have Deathrite Enchantment. They have Inevitability.
Yes. Yeah.
You are not winning this game if you don't attack at some point. And I think I would have been looking for a spot to do that here.
I guess I have to in my hand too. I already played the Timeless Dragon, so I have 1 card in hand. It's just Thalia. Yeah. I did think about it for a long time. I feel like I'm remembering. It didn't occur to me to attack with just one thing. My like thinking was either I'm attacking to draw a card or I'm not attacking. So I didn't put that option on the table for myself. I remember. And then I think I remember just thinking it feels so bad to trade this Rebel token for a 1/2, and none of their 1/2s are valuable at all, right? Like Thraben Inspector made a clue already. Kitesail Freebooter didn't get anything. They're not going to block with Giver of Runes, so trading with either of those felt bad at the time, I think.
Booter's their only flyer, and you have 7 in the air starting next turn.
Yes.
Trading with Booter would have been great here.
Gotcha. Just because it's 1 less chump block of Timeless Dragon.
Yeah, you're up a card on the Rebel attack. They're down a card on the Freebooter, which also happens to be the one thing between your Air Force, and their life total. And Giver's going to be active next turn, so they just can block forever at that point.
Maybe what was the line here instead than just like attack before playing anything? Don't show them that they have a 5/5 that they're going to have to maybe chump block, which will change their blocks. Also, I guess theoretically I could draw something better than Timeless Dragon to cast. That feels difficult, but possible. I could draw Teferi, I suppose.
Yeah, so
no matter what, if we're going to attack, we were definitely going to do it before playing the dragon.
Yeah, so
yeah.
I was giving you benefit of the doubt that the dragon was after you had decided not to attack. But if it wasn't, like if you just made phase 1 that, okay, all right, then let's.
I can tell from watching this video that I played the dragon and then thought about it for about 5 minutes. So
okay, let's talk about that then.
Yeah,
you just pointed out a little bit. So, there's one unknown card in your hand. It's the Pluto Delta at the start of your turn. They've seen Thalia and Timeless Dragon. They don't know that you have land number 5.
They didn't see Thalia. We connived that.
Oh, we connived into that. Yeah. Okay. So they only know Timeless Dragon out of your 3 cards. That's even better.
Oh, I guess it was known. That was why. They knew I had Timeless Dragon, I guess, which is why I didn't care about doing it first main phase. I was like, well, who cares? But I should have.
That's a flaw for sure, because if they know about Timeless Dragon, you know that's your plan this turn. They don't know what else you've drawn since then. You have 2 mystery cards in your hand.
Yeah.
They don't know that you found land.
Well, I did have to play the polluted delta in order to cast the dragon. So
right. So if you just
I see.
save, you get a land drop second main too. So don't play your land. Don't play your dragon. Just move to combat. If the rebel draws a card that might meaningfully change your plan, maybe you're off Timeless Dragon at that point. So you committed to a full 5 mana play that gave up all of your secret information before you even had all the information that you would have this turn if you attacked with the rebel.
Right.
And them knowing, like, they might think that rebel attack is just you trying to spike land number 5 for dragon.
To actually cast the dragon, yeah.
Right. And they don't know that you have it already. Maybe they prioritize clearing the rebel, making you re-equip if you're going to draw another card. If they don't know that you already have land 5 for dragon. It gave away a ton of information about what you both do and don't have by main phasing the dragon. And also, like, if we just draw Wandering Emperor off rebel, that might change things.
Right.
If we draw maybe we draw a 2-drop and we'd rather play Thalia and something else and then connive once rather than jump the dragon. Like, that was definitely left a lot on the table, both as far as what your opponent has to think about and opportunities for yourself by doing it first.
Yeah, I guess I like to think that if they hadn't seen the Timeless Dragon, I wouldn't have done that. I think I was just like, oh, you know about this. It seems like plainly the best thing to do, and I just kind of like... part of it was I think that I was just like, let me put this in play and then look at this whole board again to figure out what my attacks are, if anything. But yeah, I guess I didn't value the like information of one of the last cards in my hand is a polluted delta, right? Like, to me, I guess I saw that as like such a minor piece of information, but I see your point that it's actually pretty major.
Right, because you didn't take an opportunity last turn to trade off with the Blade of the Oni because they had mana up and cards in their hand. Yes. And then you did not give them the same opportunity to take damage for no reason because they're playing around your mana up with cards in hand.
Right.
Like, you're spotting them that game advantage because you're thinking about, oh, what do they have? And then taking away that advantage from yourself by showing them
just because they knew about one card in my hand, and I was like, well, you know my whole plan because you know this one card, which is not the case. Yeah.
Right. And even like bluffs in combat or hiding information aside, if this rebel attacked and you drew a card this turn, you didn't even know your plan yet, which is, I think, a greater sin than giving up what your plan actually is you don't know what your plan is. You could have drawn something different or better that changes what ideas you had.
Yeah, I do think one thing I struggle with is I think I often get in this mindset of like, the game is going a certain way, and my mindset here was like, I am on the defense. I have to just like not die because they have these menace creatures and this like life loss with the Death Ray Shaman. I'm already at 11. So I think I was just kind of playing conservatively because I felt like I was behind and had to protect my life total, whereas everything we've talked about for the past 10 minutes has been a great explanation for why I actually are on a 2-turn clock here. And
yeah, you're not behind. You are, in fact, threatening the biggest creature on the board.
Yeah.
And you have a greater diversity of creature colors with which to battle their Giver of Runes.
There was a lot of discussion about how annoying it was for my opponent that the rebel was red. I do remember that, yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You've got 3 colors they have to Giver around. They only have 2 colors you have to Mother around. And you have the 2 biggest creatures on board in this Ledger Shredder and this Dragon.
Yeah.
And they can tie you on creature size by equipping the Blade of the Oni to something, but who cares? Like, that'll eat up their whole turn, and you could still just double, triple block it with Mother of Runes protection. I don't even think that is good. I think it's better as a 3-1 than it is as a 5-5 right now.
Yeah, I don't think they ever reconfigured it this game.
Yeah, it just does. That's what I'm saying. Like, the most effective counterspell is reducing your opponent's life total to 0.
Right, yeah.
And one of the first rules of limited is ABC, just always be clocking. If you can poke for 1 point somewhere, do it. Even if it was just Ledger Shredder and you left your Rebel back, didn't draw a card, I think that was just completely free to do.
Sure. Okay, so I didn't do any of that, but that's very helpful to talk out. So So they untap, and the first thing I do with their mana is play a Dark Confidant, which is kind of the very bottom edge of the screen there. The board's getting kind of big to manage. And my opponent, my opponent specifically said they couldn't mentally have the creatures be in 2 rows, so we have to just kind of manage with a tight screen here.
Fair enough. And Dark Confidant is the type of card where you wish you had poked for 2 if you could.
Yeah, for sure. It makes the race a lot more relevant because they have a better late game now, and also they might just take a couple damage off the top and have the game at a turn sooner. I think right now they are literally having the conversation with themselves of like, oh, you have a red, a white, and a blue creature, because they almost give her their Blade of the Oni, but then didn't. I don't know. How do MTGO replays work? I assume it's just like every game action is one step and there's not actual like time recorded in them. Is that true?
It's something like that. It doesn't show sideboarding. You can't rewind. They're frequently corrupted. It's
You can't
honestly
rewind?
a train wreck. No, they only go forward. And I think there's like a play button that just goes very quickly, action by action, and then there's a like double arrow button that goes through the turn, and those are the options that you have. It's really bad.
Wild. So they just played Dark Confidant and passed after monologuing about how annoying it is that I had a red creature. And then I
remember last turn when I said, if you had attacked, what if you draw Wandering Emperor? That might have changed your play. And this is the card on top of your deck right now.
That is, I was sitting here looking at the next card I was going to draw. I didn't want to spoil it for you, but yeah, that is what I drew. Yeah. So yeah, now I have a Wandering Emperor, and now I assume I just play Thalia. Well, no, what do? I probably don't play Thalia here. I probably hold up Wandering Emperor. That makes way more sense, right? I assume it's what I do. Do I attack now is the question. Let's find out what past Andy was doing.
I would be turning my flying creature sideways.
Yeah. Now that the dragon can also attack, that feels more... Let's see what happens. Maybe the question here is like, do I, instead of holding up Wandering Emperor, re-equip Glimmerlens to one of the flying creatures, play Thalia, and have that be my use of 5 mana for the turn? Also get to draw a card off of that, but then I don't have to like throw my Rebel token to the dogs, and can keep it back to block something later.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I was thinking the Rebel would die anyway, but it's not living weapon. This is an actual creature.
It's an actual 2/2, yeah. And the Glimmerlens grants no power toughness boosts. It's just if it attacks with another creature, you draw a card.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of into that. One thing you have to be careful of is that Glimmerlens is white, and so is their deck. So if you ever give the equipped creature for white, it'll fall off. But I don't think we're currently in concern about that.
So it looks like what I did here is not attack. I think I didn't re-equip. I think I just like, if I hadn't drawn the Wandering Emperor, I'm pretty sure I would have taken the line I just described because it would have been the most efficient use of mana. And I tend to, I don't know, I think sometimes I lean on heuristics too hard. I think here, sometimes when I get presented with a big board like this, full transparency, I am not great at big boards. I feel like I am prone to miss information. And so I think I tend to play conservative on big, complicated boards. And so here, I think I was like, holding up the Wandering Emperor seems impossibly safe, right? Like, I get the last decision. If they do something that I don't like, I can, respond to it with this powerful card. And I guess I also maybe just felt like I already have something to do with my mana this turn, so drawing a card is obviously not bad, but it's still great, but maybe not as important as it would be if I had just like ripped another land or something. Let's
talk about that because it's in my head.
Let's do it.
What happens here if you re-equip, attack with your 2 flyers, and draw a white source?
What happens here? I get to play the white source and then hold up the Wandering Emperor.
Right. Yep. This is the same thing that happened last turn of drawing a card materially changes information and can change entire plans. And you have this tasty little backup plan of annoying first strike creature on this board if you don't spike the white source. But if you do, you get to look like I just drew a land pass. And like right now, having 5 mana up, you're a white deck. Your opponent probably has some idea of what's in the cube. I'm not buying it for a second that you have nothing.
Yeah, my opponent knows the cube well.
Right.
So
I'm really into putting the Glimmer Lens probably on Ledger Shredder rather than uh Dragon, because if they have one removal spell, they want to use it on Dragon.
Thing, yeah.
You're right. So
yeah.
I'm really into putting the equipment on Ledger Shredder, attacking with the 2 flyers. They have a real choice of, am I going to tap out of my Giver to save 5 damage right now? Do I just chump block? Do I need this Giver to push through on their turn? Like, you have to think that not only how do I raise my floor and not lose, and how do I find my ceiling and start pushing for damage, but your opponent is making those same decisions. They have Horizon Canopy for mana. They're a little worried. They just spent their first turn of the game not attacking, and they are now behind. That's their assessment. By not attacking, they're telling you, I think I'm behind and I don't think I'm getting through here.
Yeah.
And can they push through if their Giver dies and you still have Mother? They might just take 7 here or chump block and not try to save the booter. But you have to give them the opportunity to make that decision. And even if they make the decision well and just make the obvious block your 5/5, give my creature pro white, at least you know that that's where their head's at.
Right.
And they're okay losing Giver.
Yeah.
Right. And +1 card here. If it's the white source, you spent mana on your turn, you made a land drop.
White source is great for sure. If that's what I do, yeah.
And even if it's not white source, you have the failsafe of Thalia, which is another
still
body on the board.
Something to do with my mana. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in a spot where you need to be finding damage because they have a card advantage engine and you don't right now. They stuck Dark Confidant. Any point you get on them.
Or rather, I do have a card advantage engine I'm neglecting to use.
Right. You're just choosing not to use it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Good strategy, Andy. The other decision I had here, so given that I didn't do any of that, there's another decision I had here, which I was definitely worried about the Deathrite Shaman. You mentioned the Deathrite Shaman is inevitability. I was definitely like, I'm effectively at 9 already because you already have a Night's Whisper in the graveyard and Deathrite Shaman up. And like I said, there's not an abundance of removal in my deck. I have, a few, but it's not like it's a control deck with a ton of 1-for-1 removal. So being able to just like pick it off is not a given over the next couple turns. I was thinking here, like, do I even, Wandering Emperor now and get rid of the Deathrite Shaman? Because he taps it to make mana to crack the clue on end step. And I had a moment where I was like, do I do that now and just take that thing out while I can?
So that doesn't work if Giver's up, but you attacking puts Giver down.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Should have attacked. Good talk.
I think between this turn and last turn, they would be at 10 life, maybe less. And you would be up at least 1 card, maybe 2.
It definitely has a cascading snowballing effect where if I had chipped in for damage the previous turn, it would have looked so much more appealing to have attacked this turn. It would have been so much more obvious that they were really on the back foot and needed to draw an answer and that I was actually in a commanding position. But yeah, very humbling to watch this in hindsight.
Right. And we know their permanents cost 1 and 2, but the spells in the cube, Luris can still play with. Bob, I don't know if you play Murderous Cut or how heavy this Bob could hit, but that's live. And when we're at this point where neither player thinks they can attack, turning Bob into a liability is a great place to put that opponent.
Right, just put them lower. They hit Chromatic Sphere off of their Dark Confidant, so they take 1. Put them to 13. Let's see what they do here.
Your cube is beautiful, by the way. I've been thinking it the whole time, but seeing that Invasion Foil Chromatic Sphere flip.
I just picked that up at SCG Philly. I love it. Thank you.
I play Pauper, and I am a foil maniac, so I have my set of those as well. I also have a Luris EDH deck, Karlov, and then Luris is the companion, and I have that card in foil. Basically your opponent's whole deck I also have in foil in that deck.
It's funny.
So I appreciate everything that's going on.
I used to not be a big foil guy, and then something just changed, and I was like, actually, wait a minute, I love these. And so my opponent actually thought for a while now whether they were going to play their Godless Shrine untapped or tapped.
Right.
Which, what does that tell you? I guess.
It tells me,
and they have a few cards in hand now. I know because they cracked the Cool in their instep. They have the Chromatic Sphere off the Dark Confidant. I think they had a couple other cards in hand anyway. Something I was really noticing this game is that my opponent is ostensibly more aggressive than me, but they are never short of cards with the way their deck is constructed, right? The Thraben Inspectors and Luris and all these other Dark Confidants and stuff. They were kind of constantly churning through a nice flow of cards.
Right. Yeah. So the idea of playing the land tapped or untapped tells me that they have 6 mana worth of things they could do because they have the Deathrite.
They have the Reconfigure on the Blade of the Oni, which is 4.
Right.
We also have to be a little bit cognizant of the Coven ability on Sun Gold Sentinel, which can be activated multiple times. And again, the red creature really helps here because that makes a Sun Gold Sentinel unable to be blocked and gives it hexproof from a color until end of turn. But they would have to do it 3 times for me to not be able to block with anything, or 2 times in conjunction with the Giver of Runes or something to make it actually unblockable. Right. So there are a lot of mana sinks just on board.
Also, reach for and cast Luris is a 6 mana line.
Yep. They run out the Sphere here after they chose to play the Godless Shrine tapped. Then they played a Sphere.
Yep.
And we both just kind of stared at and thought about this board state for a while, which in hindsight now it's clear that my opponent was like, couldn't do anything because they had nothing. They were disadvantaged, and I was like paralyzed by fear and actually was advantaged, but failed to act on it.
Yeah, there's a great article from the ancient days of Magic, late 90s Magic, maybe early 2000s, called The Fear, which is how players just don't make good plays because they're worried about what their opponent might have.
Yeah.
That's a super simplified version of it. Google it if you're not familiar, but that it's really important to have respect for what your opponent may reasonably do, but just living in paralysis of they could have anything. No, they can't. They could have like 23 different things.
Yeah.
And what are they? What's the worst one? What's the best one? Have they given me any indication which one they're on? It's just understanding the difference between healthy respect for the board state and baseless fear is really important.
I definitely feel that on big boards specifically. And it's not even just I'm afraid of what they could have. I'm afraid of what I could be missing on the board, right? Like just on this board state, we have the Reconfigure on Blade of the Oni. We have the Giver of Runes offering, this threat of protection across the entire board. We have the Sun Gold Sentinel activation. We have the multiple Deathrite Shaman activations. We have a known Luris. And right now, no permanents in the graveyard to get back with Luris, which might have also maybe informed some of my neglect to attack. Just don't give them something to play off of Luris. Keep making that look bad, which I don't think is actually a lot of equity and probably shouldn't be really factoring into my decision much. But
no, that doesn't matter at all. Yeah. If they have to spend 8 mana to reach for Luris, cast Luris, and redeploy the 2-drop that they jumped with, you're in good shape because you're bashing for 7 in the air that whole time.
Right.
And if you don't attack, they'll eventually find something like this Chromatic Sphere to just go off with Luris.
Exactly.
While they wait for you to make a move.
Yeah. So they did nothing. They played Chromatic Sphere, played Godless Shrine tapped, and after a while passed. So I end-stepped the Wandering Emperor, which I feel like I'm really hesitant to say seems like the obvious play anymore, but obviously I want to put my Planeswalker in play, right?
Yeah, this is clearly just right. You get to add a Vigilance creature to this board. That's just another weird thing they have to think about. You can hand out First Strike to either the 3/3 Vigilance and just First Strike poke into that squad, or giving your Rebel +1/+1 First Strike. It lets you draw a card and give some really difficult blocks.
Yeah, if memory serves, I think this sees the beginning of me actually starting to attack now that I have enough of an advantage that I guess I lost the fear. Though they are also going to end step. Are you familiar with the card Lethal Scheme?
I am. That's a removal spell with Convoke that
connives for every creature you convoked with.
Oh, baby.
So they are lethal scheming my Wandering Emperor on end step, just full convoke cost and convoking with all 4 of these creatures. So they get 4 Connives, which is obviously good, but also tapped out of a lot of their board, which I took note of for sure.
Right. And then this is the type of moment where we wish that they were at 9 instead of 14.
Because they might
or
not have been able
instead
to
of
afford to
13.
do that, right? Yeah.
Right. Because maybe they need the blockers. Now they have this massive card selection and potential damage on board boost for next turn. And like there was some version of events where we could just like pro white our dragon and put them to 2 here or whatever with a Wandering Emperor pump and get past their flyer.
Right. I'm
They
fast
might
forwarding
even
here.
die on this board. So you made a 2/2. You have 2 power flyer, 2/2/2/2,
5/5.
5/5. Like you can make the 5/5 unblockable and just attack around them if they're at 9 right now instead of 13.
Yeah.
There might be some path to actual lethal right now.
Oh, the other thing that happened is that was her second spell because they cast Chromatic Sphere. So I was resolving my Connive first. So I drew Prismatic Ending.
All right.
And then discarded Thalia because I liked the removal spell.
That makes sense.
And then they resolve their 4 Connives, so I'm going to fast forward through that. And I think they got counters on 2 of their creatures, maybe? A counter on the Sun Gold Sentinel. It is a little tricky, too, because you have to, say what order you're conniving in and all that stuff. I think that card's really cool, though. I enjoy that card. I really like that it's a removal spell that control decks are like not that happy to run most of the time. It's cool. It's cool to have that option because usually the removal spells just go everywhere. Can I go faster than 2x quick time? Is that possible? There's 5x. Okay, so they got a counter on Sun Gold Sentinel and the 3-bin Inspector, and then I untapped and drew Skull Clamp for turn, which now we have more options. So yeah, I guess want to ask you what to do here. I guess I've got Skull Clamp and Prismatic Ending in hand. This board, they only have 3 blockers up, 2 of which they are definitely not keen to lose in combat. Though all my threatening stuff is in the air. Well, really threatening stuff is in the air anyway. So what is your line here?
So they have 15 damage on board to our 11 life if we assume that all of their creatures are still in play next turn.
Yes.
Which we know is not going to be the case because they'll be required
at least
to...
ending the Giver of Runes, bare minimum.
Right.
And they are also... Are they required to block? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I have exactly lethal in play, not counting the Mother of Runes. So they do have to block something. And then they also have Bob in play. So...
Right. So here, again, we wish they were 4 points less than they are.
Yes, point taken.
But since we are here, I think that putting Skull Clamp on... So there's 2 options here, which is you can put Skull Clamp on Stoneforge Mystic and make it a creature that will trade with anything that tangles with it, which it's currently just
Bouncing.
the one creature that doesn't have a good attack.
Yeah.
But they can just not block that and take 2, and you're down 2 mana on a situation where you're about to draw a card with your Rebel. And so do we think that getting Stoneforge Mystic into the red zone as a 2/1 that will probably not die is better than having 2 mana up to make decisions with later in the turn? And I do not think that is there. I think Stoneforge Mystic is a great blocker on this board that your opponent now juiced up quite a bit. I'm probably into attacking with the Rebel and the Flyers once again.
Mm-hmm.
And that leaves your Mother active, leaves 2 blockers back. Oh, I guess the Samurai is Vigilant, so that's a freebie. So
yeah, Samurai is a freebie.
Yeah, the everything except Stoneforge and Mother can attack here. And you get a card straight up off the Rebel, and then you still have the ability to Prismatic Ending, Skull Clamp. I guess a Connive would just be mill 1 here, so that's not helpful.
Unless I do it after I attack and draw a card with the Rebel, then I do have some choice.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And Yeah, if they block Rebel or Samurai with one of their one power creatures, that's now a thing that can die to Skull Clamp. So I like just attacking with everything except Mother and Stoneforge Mystic, drawing your card,
And you do
and
that before you play anything, right? Like
absolutely
just
yes.
attack. No,
Yep,
don't bother skull clamping anything to get in for extra damage or threaten to draw cards if they try and trade with the rebel.
correct. So you could prismatic ending the giver pre-combat, but then they get to know that prismatic ending's out. I kind of want to. You could do that anytime. Like you could do that second main. Whereas if they tap giver to absorb some damage in combat, now
Just
you can
get rid
get
of the
rid of
Death Ray
Blade
Shaman.
of the Oni or something that you're more worried about.
Man, the fear is so. I can't believe it looks like I only attack with the rebel and the samurai here.
Yeah.
It's so
Yep.
embarrassing, Brian.
I mean, there's no reason to be embarrassed about a learning opportunity. Like that's why I'm here. That's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah,
This
I
I
draw.
think this game was winnable and probably on this turn
Yeah,
if we had been looking for damage throughout the game.
I mean, I'll spoil it for you. I do eventually win this game, but it takes me way longer than it should. Is the nut of this because, and I'm really struck by the like snowballing nature of like it seeming like my fear being more pronounced because they're at a higher life total because I didn't attack the turn before, and then like that just continuing to snowball out of control, and me just being terrified of the crackback here. I guess I don't know what was going on. So they sacrificed the chromatic sphere for mana of some color.
Probably green to gain life.
I'm guessing maybe with the Murktide Regent by exiling it. Let's see here. Looks like they just took the 4 and didn't use the mana. Yeah, they took the 4 and didn't use the mana. So then I am in my second main phase now, and I think deciding what I want to do, given that I have drawn Fairy Vandal, and now I have Skull Clamp, Fairy Vandal, and Prismatic Ending. The only reason a main phase the Fairy Vandal, I imagine, would be to trigger Connive if I wanted to do that in combination with one of the other spells. If I don't want to cast exactly Skull Clamp and Prismatic Ending. But let's see what happens.
Yeah, I think that Fairy Vandal and then end the giver, get a Connive, grow the Vandal is a pretty good second main here.
Shredder and Vandal are cool together. They kind of
Yes, best friends.
They kind of go dummy. Let's see what I did. Fun for the whole family. I'm counting now to see exactly how much damage he has on board. This is definitely the kind of game that I struggle with, which is why I was glad to capture it. So I didn't do that either. I just passed the turn. I guess because I made the assessment that none of these threats were like, again, I was playing from the back foot this entire game, even though I was actually ahead. So my assessment was like, am I dead on board if I don't remove something with Prismatic Ending? If not, save it for Luris or save it for something even scarier, and just instead hold up this Fairy Vandal. I don't know what the argument is for not playing Skull Clamp. I guess you could connive it away, but I don't know why I wouldn't play Skull Clamp.
Yeah, for most of our plays this game, even though we've identified better ones, at least could understand what's going on. And I don't mean that as rude as it may have come off, but this Giver of Runes is the only target for Prismatic Ending as long as it's in play.
And untapped, yeah.
Right. So I think Prismatic, it's also the thing that messes up combat for you. Like you having Mother and them having Giver has kept this game pretty close. If they lose their Giver and you still have Mother, they can just never attack. And Vandal, Ending, Trigger Connive, discard whatever, +1/+1 counter. Now you have another flyer on this board where your flyers are already dominating the game if you choose to engage them at any point. So like that, I'm not sure what went on there.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking either, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, I mean, I spoiled the ending of this game. It goes on for a little while longer, but, I eventually do get there. But I feel like the lesson I've already learned the lesson from this game, which is the macro lesson is just that I did a bad job in the like mid game assessing when I had actually become the threat. Like I think that one turn you mentioned where your opponent didn't attack for the first time, and they like thought pretty hard about it and were like visibly annoyed to not get to attack. That was probably a term where I should have like had a bigger thought about what the state of the game was and what my role in it was. Then I didn't, and I instead just stayed on the defensive, and I just kind of like played behind this cowardly wall of enormous flyers that could have just put pressure on my opponent and ended the game way sooner than it did, just way, way, way sooner. So
Right. And a thing happened last turn as well where I laid out this big attack that forces them to activate Giver of Runes just to save 5 life, and then Giver's tapped, and we can prismatic ending whatever we want. And by making just the smallest possible attack, they didn't have to commit Giver to anything.
Right.
And then prismatic ending wasn't on unless it was targeting Giver. And then we
Yeah.
just ended up casting 0 spells instead. And just thinking about like just the context of what do they need to worry about, not just what you need to worry about. And they need to worry about the 8 power of flying you have. That could have been 10 power this turn. And if you remove the Giver, then they have no way to, like, they can chump with Booter one more time, and then they're out of here. This game is done.
I guess they could theoretically, go get Luris and recast it every single turn, but that's a very advantageous spot for me if they're just playing a chump blocker every turn that doesn't do anything.
Right. So yeah, then they're taking 5 from your Ledger Shredder and Vandal, and the Vandal is likely to grow because Ledger Shredder is in play still. Skull Clamp is in the mix here. They'll probably have to double spell to get ahead if one of their spells that return is Booter just to chump. They're going to be feeding your Shredder, which is feeding your Vandal. They're both getting bigger. This game would not last 3 more turns if the Flyers were just engaged here.
It shouldn't have lasted to this turn at all. I think this is the turn it probably should have been over.
I think it could have ended this turn, but even from this spot, making all the same decisions we did, there are not 3 more turns of this game.
37 minutes. Let's see how much longer this game actually goes. 37 minutes. It's not actually many more turns because they were super long turns, but it did last 20 more minutes from that point.
It looks like
I only drew
Vandals
3
here.
more cards, though, so I ended up drawing a Treasure Cruise, a Spellbinder, and a Portable Hole, and that was the last card I drew for game, so I never even cast a Treasure Cruise, so I think it was like 2 or 3 more turns, but they were like impossibly long turns where I was just paralyzed with trying to actually get through when actually I was advantaged for a long time, so very humbling, very humbling.
The one super coherent thing that your deck does is you have a lot of flying creatures.
Yeah.
And those don't help if they're on defense.
Right. Yeah. Flying a lot worse on defense than attacking.
Right. It's basically not an ability on defense, and it's a great ability on offense.
Not that it is a good explanation, but it looks like what I did instead of play the Skull Clamp or the Prismatic Ending was play the Brazen Borrower and Fairy Vandal, which used all 5 of my mana and did Connive at instant speed and put a lot of pressure in play. The Fairy Vandal or the Brazen Borrower was kind of like off the screen a little bit, but that was on an adventure for most of the game.
Yeah, that's actually really good. I forgot about the adventure, and we filled in that gap, and we filled it in a way that's extremely satisfactory. So I'm into that. Like that adds 5 power of flying.
Yeah.
You recognize that your line here is fly over this ugly board state. Yeah. And you found a way to do that. So, all right, I'm glad we figured that out.
Wasn't so incredibly hugely awful, but still very humbling. With just our last like 5 minutes here, I know this is only like 2 games, but I'm curious. One thing I am focusing on is like obviously I want to try and it's helpful to know how I could have played these games better, obviously. And then in the abstract, I'm trying to figure out like how that can be translated into lessons of just like places that I struggle as a player. Other than things we've talked about, like the fear, maybe being a little bit too conservative if I feel like I'm on the back foot and not recognizing when the game has turned a little bit, or just hey, read the cards every time a spell is cast. It's actually not that hard to like look at all the cards and know what they do and figure it out. Is there any
Right.
other obvious, like more abstract things you think that I could work on?
I think that, like we just said about this deck being full of flying creatures, like you draft a deck not quite what the cube really represents, no particular archetype here, but what strength does it have? And the strength it has is flying creatures. And that's not a thing that was said until I said it 1 minute ago.
Right.
So I don't know if you identified that in your play or if it just like you chose these creatures for the cube because they had flying and then it, whether that was directly in your head or not. But a deck with Elite Spellbinder in it is not here to play a 22 game control game.
Yes.
Or 22 turn control game. You need to attack for 3 in the air before they get the extra 2 mana to cast their spell that you kicked out of it. So just recognizing what this deck actually is, and what it is blue-white tempo that didn't quite
Fell
line
short.
up. Yeah. But it's still blue-white tempo. Mother of Rune's not a control card. Glimmerland's not a control card, etc. So recognizing what your deck actually does and leaning into it. We talked about before you take any game action, and anytime your opponent does take a game action, just look at all the cards and play real quick and make sure nothing is triggering, nothing's happening. And in those big clunky situations where your opponent has 11 non-land permanents in play, you were describing kind of just like panic, basically, of like
getting like paralyzed, just like, oh,
right,
I probably can't do anything because look at all the things they could possibly do, and I can't figure out what I'll miss something. Is kind of the fear that I have. It's just like I will probably screw up if I do something other than just hold up my mana and do things at the last possible moment, whether that's Wandering Emperor or, flashing in flyers or whatever.
Okay, so like I want you to, I mean, we're starting to leave magic coaching and get into just like performance coaching, which is you're a magic player capable enough of designing a cube and knowing that coaching would be something valuable to you and dedicating these time and resources to getting it. Like, you're not a dumb person. You're not a bad magic player. There's no reason for you to paralyze yourself by being, I'm going to miss something. I'll just do nothing. Why are you going to miss something? You can read every card on that board. You know what they do. And just one by one, figure it out. And in the worst case scenario, just like count up how much damage they could attack you for. And if that number is smaller than your life total, then poke in for 2 damage in the air. Like, at least being completely paralyzed versus like, okay, I'll just attack with Ledger Shredder instead of Shredder and Dragon. Like, do something. Get yourself pushed in the right direction there. And really just like, I work with a lot of people who are like, when the board gets gummed up, I just get too scared to do anything, or I only play burn because I'm not smart enough to play a back and forth game. Like, That's not true. Magic's hard. Everybody who is at the stage of their Magic career that they would seek out coaching is smart enough to know, smart enough to play a back and forth game. And just getting that out of your head and solving the equation rather than just like seeing all the numbers on the board and being like, I can't do math. It's like, no, just, start to solve for X, then we solve for Y, and then at the end we know what Z is. It's all just an equation. And whatever it is that's not letting you slow down and process the information, just try to take a deep breath and process it one step at a time.
Yeah. The crazy thing is, even when this game did actually end, so what ended up happening here is I had all these extra flyers, and then I did play the Elite Spellbinder, I portable hold something of theirs, and then I essentially swung in for everything, and it's still, was sandbagging like 2 instant speed removal spells. He had a March and something else, and it was still like, oh, you're just barely dead, which underscores the whole like why chipping in for 2 damage would have been huge all along, because even when I did decide like, all right, now it's just Alpha Strike time, only barely got there,
Right. And if you had found that extra 2 points early on, and Ledger Shredder is growing, so it's 2 points
Yeah,
on
it's a
that first turn we identified it. It's
5-7
three a
now
turn
at the
after.
last turn of the game. It's huge.
Yeah, now it's bigger than the dragon.
Yeah.
Like, if you find that chip damage and put your opponent under pressure, then they don't get to sandbag a gigantic counter strike for your alpha move.
Right.
Like they're gonna have to.
They don't get
spend
to do
that
the thing that
march.
I was explicitly afraid of, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like it is not getting better for you because a lot of people have this idea too, where it's like, I'm not sure if I can beat this board state. I'll wait for another draw step. I'll see what I draw next.
Right.
But they're drawing cards too.
And honestly, the thing is, like, I remember I was planning to, I think, attack all at this turn anyway, but what actually gave me the confidence to do it was Spellbinder, because I'm like, I see your hand. Okay, that's what you were sandbagging. And then I thought for like 90 seconds about, like, does that thing you're sandbagging actually save you here or not? And it was like, I think it came down to, like, Exacxies. He was almost at 1 life, and then it was just going to come down to the Bob flip, like, do you hit a land or not? Which would have been a fun way for the game to end, too. But, yeah, really struck by the amount that poor decision in the mid game really snowballed, and I'd like to give myself the benefit of the doubt that if I had, like, made that one assessment slightly differently, and then he had been at a lower life total, that maybe I would have made future assessments also differently. But yeah, this is very helpful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're basically at time, but I'll take a minute to finish this last thought. Like that turn where the opponent did not attack after attacking every turn of the game.
Mm-hmm.
If you poke with Ledger Shredder, get your beak wet. Another that pun might have been intended. Like get your beak wet with that 2 damage, and then they take another turn where they don't attack, even though you just poked them.
That's like
your confidence should be flying.
Yes,
like,
that is definitely a sign that all is clear. Like if even with one more creature tapped down, one of my better blockers tapped down, they're still not attacking. Like that I think would definitely have made me smell blood in the water.
Yep, time to get on the gas pedal for sure. Yep.
Yeah. This is so helpful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.
Real quick, how difficult was this relative to like looking at MTGO replays?
This was fine. We mentioned it a few times, but I wish we knew cards in hand. But the board state is very clear to me, and I love this little hand display that you have for your cards. This is wonderful.
Right. You mean you miss a number of cards in hand from my opponent, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is actually maybe the most important thing that wasn't tracked. So I might try and do this again in the future, and if so, I just want to improve anything I can improve, and that might be doable. So.
Yep. Well, you know where to reach me if you want me to come back. This was
I mean, now that you at least know a little bit about me as a player, it might be interesting to play some more in the future, maybe try and improve a little bit, and then come back for more.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, cool. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. And also definitely very humble.